Hi, this is Luke for Basic Drum Co. I'm going to go over the controls for our COATED-19 drum set. When you first launch the plugin, you're going to see this drum window. From this window, you can audition your individual drums with a click. You can also switch the perspective. Right now, this is set for drummer's perspective, which means the drums are going to move across the stereo field in a way similar to this picture. If I switch it to audience perspective, that's going to be reversed, and now your drums will go the opposite direction around the stereo field. It's really just a matter of what you prefer. Each drum has three possible sources for its final sound. There's a direct mic, which is like a close mic, the typical way you record a drum set. There's overhead, which is bleed, and then there's room sound, which is the sound of the drum being picked up by microphones out in the recording room. By balancing these three different microphone levels, you can get a lot of different sounds. So here's the snare. That's the direct pickup. Here's the overhead, which is to say it's leakage. And then here's the room. And if I really crank that up, you get a huge sounding room. So by balancing these three controls, I can get a lot of different sounds out of each of my drums. You also have control for the MIDI note number for each individual drum, so you can change that to match your sequencer or your keyboard. You have pan control for each individual drum, and you have pitch control for each individual drum. And the pitch control on this particular set is very effective. I can go up about 300% before the drum starts sounding a little bit artifacty, and I can go quite a bit lower and still get a usable sound. And here's a trick. The china, if you pitch it way up, makes a nice splash cymbal. Once you balance out how you want each of your individual drums to sound, you can switch over to the mixer and then balance off the entire kit. You have inputs for kick, snare, all your tom-toms, all your overheads, your rooms, and then you have this parallel. And I'll explain that in a second. Each of these channels has a solo, a mute, and a phase reverse, and you can set the outputs to different outputs on your DAW. And by just balancing this, you can get a lot of different sounds. And you can still individually change drums. Now, the parallel processing is a little hard to describe, but it's something you're really going to like. What you basically do is take a feed from your main drum mix, run it out to a compressor or a EQ or a combination of things, and then bring that back in to the main mix so you have unprocessed drums and then very heavily processed drums. So let me give you an idea of how this sounds. I'm going to pull down the parallel. So now this is the kit without the parallel processing. And I'm going to start turning up the parallel processor, and you'll hear this huge, punchy, and very compressed drum sound. And that's a really cool sound. Now you can adjust how much each of your channels sends to the parallel. You can adjust the overall level to the parallel, and you can also mute and solo the parallel. But let's take a look at what the parallel is actually doing, what the processor is on the parallel. So if you click on the parallel tab, you'll come over to here, and you'll see we have three processors on the parallel. The first is a talkback limiter. Okay, what a talkback limiter is, in the good old days of the big studio, they'd hang microphones in the studio so that musicians recording could communicate with the control room easily without having to press buttons. They ran those microphones through something called a talkback limiter, and basically what it was a down and dirty, cheap compression circuit just to keep noise from the studio from potentially blowing out a control room speaker or hurting the engineer's ears. So what happened in this one particular session, Phil Collins was playing drums, and the engineering staff happened to hear it coming through the talkback microphones through the talkback limiter, which was really compressing it, and they loved the sound, and that became kind of the drum sound of the 80s. So this circuit lets you get that sound. Now this is a very, very very savage compressor. You can adjust the amount to less and more, but it's almost always working. The only way to get rid of it is to turn it off. So let's just hear a little bit of what that compressor circuit does. So that's less. You can still see there's a huge amount of activity on the meter. That's pretty crazy amounts of limiting. You also have makeup gain, so you can bring the levels back up if you really squash them. And you have some saturation here, so you can add distortion to that signal. And the last thing you have in this parallel section is basically two tube-style inductor equalizers. So these are very gentle equalizers, similar to Pultec, and you have control over a boost and a cut. You can pick out a high frequency and a low frequency, and you have bandwidth. Now these are very general kind of EQs. These are not precision EQs. They're designed to really shape an overall sound, not to go in and selectively hit individual frequencies. Now some of you are looking at this going, there's a boost and cut, what's the frequency for? The frequency is for both. So if I set this to 100 and boost, I'm boosting at 100, and if I bring that up, I'm cutting at 100. Now you would think that would flatten the curve out, but it doesn't. Instead what it does is the boost and cut interact, and you get kind of this weird bumpy thing in the frequency response. That's a very distinctive sound of the Pultec. So there's quite a bit of room in there to get some interesting sounds. And actually, this particular model of a Pultec EQ has more frequencies to choose from. It's got continuous frequencies rather than switchable. So in some ways, it's actually a little more versatile than a real Pultec. The last panel you have is settings. You can change your MIDI note numbers. You can select and save various presets, and we've included a bunch of presets which we think you'll find very useful. And the last thing is this sample folder location. The samples are stored in a different location from the plugin itself. So when you first install the plugin, there's a very good chance you'll have to tell it where your samples are. You'll click this button, navigate to where your samples are, and then your plugin will know where to find your samples so your drums will properly work. And that's about it. If you have any questions, you can find us on Facebook, or you can get in touch with us through our website. We hope you enjoy your COATED-19 drums. We hope you use them a lot. We know right now a lot of you are trapped inside. You can't gig. It's hard to make music. So we hope you find the COATED-19 drums useful to you, and it makes this time a little